welcome back to Comic Book Nation's Invincible Season 2 recap segment. I am your host, Kofi Outlaw, and with me is Comic Book's assistant managing editor and fellow Invincible fan, Mr. Joe, aka J.K. Schmidt, is with me again. What's up, man?
Not much. It's been a minute since we got to talk about the part 1 or part 2 premiere, and so I'm excited to get to join back in and to talk about this finale.
Yeah, you have the expert strategy. You just come in for the bookends of Invincible. You're like, hot premiere, hot finale. I'll be there for that. All the stuff in the middle, you guys can sort out, which is a good way to go. But getting right into it, we are here to discuss the season 2 finale of Invincible, season 2, episode 8, and which is called. Oh, I didn't even write down. I thought you were stronger. These episode titles get me sometime. And if you don't know, if you haven't been following along, I am just a fan of the Invincible animated series. I never read the comic, but JK is an avid comic reader as well. And you went through this whole saga on the page before. So we always like to give you guys like our frame of reference for when we'll be talking so you know what to expect. But all right, this is going to be full spoilers. Obviously, this is a recap episode, so we can't recap without spoilers, but just so it's out there, we are going to be talking about the finale of Invincible Season 2, plus the season as a whole, and even just kind of without spoiling what we might expect for Season 3. So, JK, as somebody who read the comics and kind of knows this show obviously does some things differently, but still follows a lot of the same beats. This, for me as an animated series viewer, was the big come around back to the premiere episode where Angstrom Levy, this person who got set up as a villain in the beginning, finally has made his move against Mark, and they have what I can only describe as, once again, one of the craziest fights that only Invincible seems to do and put spins on, on comic book lore in a way that you're just like, that makes you just say WTF, like in the best kind of way, like constantly. And it's hilarious that we're in the midst of all this multiverse saga stuff on like the DC side, on the Marvel side, and people are like, oh, I'm so tired of this. But this episode definitely played with multiverse in a much different way, and I was riveted. This is kind of another, just like the season 1 finale, this is kind of what I love about Invincible, and we'll get into the deeper discussion, but it paid off so many things that we'll get into when we kind of dissect this season deeper. But on the scale of just a spectacle for an episode, it was pretty awesome. And I was surprised how much there was in this episode, because that fight is over.
It's been pretty long. I feel like every single episode in this back half has been like around 45 to 50 minutes. And, they really kind of give you everything that you'd be expecting from Invincible tackling sort of multiverse shenanigans.
Yeah. And yeah, when this fight's over, it's only 25, 26 minutes in to the episode. So there is a whole ass like other episode that deals with kind of the epilogue of season 2. And I feel like a lot of people are going to, we record these beforehand, so I got to do a little Karnak here. If you know that old Johnny Carson reference, I'm old, but I can already see Twitter kind of doing the calculations. Angstrom Levy, we got X amount of time of him on screen, and now I'm unhappy, and what was this season about, and blah, 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 blah. But yeah, they did like a whole like comic series worth of multiverse shenanigans in this one episode. And I think it's understated, because I've now watched this episode several times, what actually is happening. And I wonder how it played out in the comics, because it's a longer form, but Mark is in these dimensions, and there's that one thing around the campfire in that montage where he's just saying, I don't even remember like how long I've been gone now. I can't track time, and how long have I been doing this, and time moves differently in these dimensions. And there is a transition that happens to him during this fight. It's like a good Star Wars tool. It's the talking and the character development, and when he ultimately happens, when he beats this man into a literal pulp, is bringing us around to what season 2 was really all about, was the trauma of what happened with his dad, and the question of who am I in this context that I now find myself. And
it's all building to that crescendo of him now that he has an idea of who he is, and it's pretty depressing, the realization, but it's all heading down, in season 3, where we're probably going to get the opening shots of the Viltrumite war. And it's, I mean, I see the criticism that you kind of alluded to, and I get it. I feel similar on a different level. But I think, kind of the things that you mentioned about the strengths of this show is that, and this is in the comic too, is that Robert Kirkman loves superhero comics. And this is definitely a love letter to all the fun things that he loved when he grew up reading Marvel, DC, G.I. Joes, Transformers, and all that stuff. And now he executes it on this scale in a way that we're familiar with all these tropes. We've seen them millions of times before, but never like this. And to see it executed like this is pretty, mind boggling. I never thought we'd get an Invincible animated series like this, and especially executed as well as it is. It's crazy. It's crazy to think about.
Yeah, let's get into some of the fun multiverse parts before we get into the deeper, serious adulting stuff. But yeah, so we have this multiverse. I mean, we will be at Comic Book, and JK's probably already writing down a bunch of articles about all the Easter eggs we get in this multiverse fight, from The Walking Dead to Mad Max world to every kind of dinosaur movie where dinos have taken over the earth, and the obvious things. I believe, who is it? What's the actor's name? Is it Josh Keaton? Is his name?
I believe so.
Yeah, who was the voice of Peter Parker in Spectacular Spider-Man. Obviously, we finally get the answer of, because everybody's been like, "Ooh, who is this?" And are we getting this crossover? And we get a kind of knockoff Spider-Man crossover that I really enjoyed. They never say a name, but he has an A. We can assume it's Arachnid something, like Arachnid Man or something like that.
Mhm.
And he's fighting Professor Ock, and that whole exchange is great. There's a little ode to Batman, the second ode to Batman in this season, where Mark goes to this dimension. He's like kind of ragging on Batman's name and all of that. And so, yeah, there's a lot of fun Easter eggs in this episode for comic fans. And like you said, it does what I love about this series, which is Robert Kirkman, and we say his name and we leave out the artist. What was it? Ryan Otterman?
Ryan Otley and Corey Walker.
Yeah, Corey Walker. Yeah. um them in a combination, just their love. This is at once, like you said, a love letter of superhero tropes, but also an examination of them, and able to turn them on their head in some interesting, and I hate to use this term because it never really applies to this genre, but in more kind of like real world consequence terms, as if imagine this in modern times for a modern kid, and what it would be like with these deeper issues of family and identity and stuff. So I also think that, at least for me, as somebody coming to the animated series, like Levy was an interesting character, but the way he's set up, you don't need him to be this character that we spend so much time with, because he's a composite of all this time, all these experiences. Like, he's seen everything, and throughout the season, we've seen him just walking through dimensions. We got the sense of how, who this guy is, but he's really just more like a plot device for taking us, the viewer, through this different kind of context and point of view of who Mark is. Like, we are so kind of ensconced in this idea that Mark is the hero of the story, but through Angstrom Levy, we see, like, no, there's a lot of times that Mark is not the hero, and it suggests how easy it could be for him to slide into being this evil thing, which is what this episode kind of centers on in this thing, when he kind of finally does snap and beat this guy to death. And that scene with Angstrom's son is horrific. Like,
oh yeah,
yeah,
it really does. It really sets up, I think, like you said, that Angstrom Levy, yeah, as far as the screen time that he gets, and him not being this person that's not pulling all these strings in the back. I think the cool thing about it is that we see Angstrom Levy, and he understands that Mark and his father can be forces of evil. They're just as dangerous as they are heroic in some universes. But the cool thing is, like, how petty he becomes towards this version of Mark, who is the most heroic one that he's come across. And it's so cool that he's so twisted that it turns him into basically trying to corrupt this person or punish him to a degree, like that. Everything that happens with his mom is just like, you feel for it, you just like, I want to see Mark kick this guy's ass. And then when Mark, he gets put through this multiversal fight where he's being like stranded in different dimensions and punched through to different dimensions and, experiencing all these different things. And then he finally kind of lets loose, and it culminates in just the way that Invincible always does so friggin' well, of just this like really brutal scene where Mark, does lose control. That Viltrumite side of him comes out, and he ends up just beating this guy to death and staying stranded. He can't even stop himself from using this guy and his powers to get back home. And he's just stuck there in this desolate wasteland apocalypse area, just with this body that he just created. It's just, it was a very satisfying conclusion to the Angstrom Levy storyline, I felt like. Uh-oh.
Oh, I'm sitting here muting. Sorry, guys. I'm talking on mute. I'm going off too. I was just going off. I was just going off about like how right you were, and shout out to the voice cast, because this is why you get this voice cast. Like Stephen Yeun in that Wasteland, when he's losing it and afterwards, and he's trying to rationalize and talk to himself into, like I had to do, that's scary. And I haven't been that scared since Ziggy's skinny ass like shot somebody and then lost it immediately in The Wire season 2. That's what keeps me from ever doing too much violence, because those scenes are very real and very terrifying. It's like, yeah, it feels great to let loose in the moment, as I now tell my 5-year-old son, but like, what happens afterwards when you like feel that, when that sick, like, you have to look at the consequences of that, and it makes you sick. Like, yeah, that stuff is really kind of terrifying, and the voice cast does it so well. And also, to the people who say like this thing gets overblown or has too many characters, like there's a reason we invested so much of that time in part 1 in Debbie's storyline. Like Debbie steps up and is like a real G hero in this one. Like when she's fighting, and she's fighting for her like bastard, her son of a bitch husband's, new kid, and protecting him and doing all that. Like that's such a big arc from where she started at the beginning of this season. And I loved the way that this, the scenes in the home with her and Angstrom are just as tense and exciting as the ones with Mark going through these dimensions, because that's what grounds comic book stuff. And her conversations with Angstrom about like you said, like, oh, you're just pissed because this is a dimension, the one dimension where Mark turned out really good and you turned out to be the villain, and you can't reconcile that. And then he snaps her arm, and just like being invincible, just we see her, Debbie is sitting there with that broken arm for quite some time, and we're just like, oh my God, like
hanging by a thread.
But it's just like none of that would have been earned if we didn't do the storyline with her, and her trying to rediscover her resilience, realizing who she is, because that's the culmination when she says to him, I'm the one who, because he's trying to get in her head, and he's like, in so many universes, you join them. And she's like, well, not in this one. I'm the reason why this planet's safe. And, that thing that she's grabbed onto of, I realize my power. And it's not like these guys who sling their fist. I was there. I taught this kid. I did thing. I nurtured him. And all that stuff I did is the sole reason why he's not like freaking out and becoming this other person. Great stuff that you don't usually get from
power
superheroes.
Of a mother, right? The power of a mom. Nothing.
I mean, and it's real. Like, again, like I said, not to bring my real life into this, but that's what I tell my wife every time. I'm like, you need to take this kid out and like take him on a date or something, because the difference between a little boy who becomes a serial killer and a little boy who doesn't is pretty much your mother. Like, I have certain powers as his dad, but like the difference between Norman Bates and a healthy citizen is mother. So,
well, we as dads, we have a different relationship with our, as kids, and kids always, moms always have that different role. And I know, like with my wife, I know in my own mom, it's just it's a different thing. And so I really enjoy how the show really kind of set that up, and also just showing how Mark feels so alone. And, because they did the whole thing with Ashley this season with the, their eventual drifting apart and breakup because, Mark is invincible, and Mark feels guilty when he's not being invincible. She feels guilty when he's not being invincible. And now we get this Mark kind of realizing, like, I have to be better, and putting all of these expectations and pressure on himself. and it just breaks his mom's heart, like I just thought it was such a good way to wrap up the emotional themes of like what basically this entire season has been about, and really kind of not wrap it up in a way that everything is solved by the end of the runtime. It's more just that like it's an existential issue that continues to develop and transform into something different that now Mark has to face, and it's all coming to a head with these Viltrumites, man. It's going to be crazy.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So let's get into season 2 as a whole and setting up season 3 as our last bit here before we get out of here. Sophomore seasons are hard. They really are, because you have to expand. You start with a simple premise in a season 1. It's like, here's this character, here's this arc. Here's Mark, here's a secret about his dad. This is all going to turn into an S show eventually. Stay tuned. And you do, and that's easy. Then we got a big payoff, a big emotional payoff, a big action payoff, and it's like, where do you go from here? Like you said, this season is all the existential. It's at once an external world building season and an internal building season for our central characters. And I think by the end of this, not everything is solved cleanly. Like, did I need Donald, Rick, and what's William and all that stuff? Maybe not. Like, maybe not. That stuff is not as heavy as I needed. Did I need that Adam and Eve special? Yeah, I needed more of that. Did I need these storylines with Mark, Debbie, and even the bits we got with Nolan and where that ends up? Yeah, I did, because that like when we get to the end of this season, and like, yeah, Debbie's wanted, and the deeper storyline of her wanting him to be a normal kid and not like his father and all that stuff, where Mark coming around to having to reconcile, like, there are some ways he does have to be like his dad, like that he has to be this kind of, the hero, the and acknowledge that Viltrumite side of him and do all that, and the confusion of all that and the despair of all that. Like, that's big. And just the last line in this post-credit scene where Nolan's just like, I think I miss my wife. And you're just like, oh man, like, now I'm already excited to see where this goes next, because we have such deep emotional portraits of these characters that it's going to galvanize a whole series of actions. And what I love about it is none of it's kind of congruent. Like, they're not on the same page. Debbie's wanting one thing, Mark's wanting another, and now Nolan's made this big switch where he apparently wants something else different. And when these things come together, I'm already in for season 3 on that alone. And like you said, there's also this small Viltrumite problem still hanging in the wings. So yeah, I think they did a good job of setting this up. And I know some people are going to have a problem with how this season probably ends, because it ends with like Mark and Eve and this kind of emotional, kind of existential downbeat, rather than like a thrilling cliffhanger or something like that. But
classic sitcom, will they, won't they set up, that maybe they should solve that right away when season 3 starts. I don't think I can do another season of Mark and Eve pining over each other, to be honest with you. That might be the only down part of it, but I mean, I think everything else, they earned it. At least you could say they earned it, that it wasn't forced. That whole scene with future Eve coming in the end and kind of, telling Mark, like, you need to go tell her so she can move on or do something, make a choice, because she's been sitting there for decades probably pining over this guy, and now she has the chance to kind of correct that mistake. And so it's interesting, man. It's kind of a cool spot that they left us in.
Yeah. And this is what I love, because as a non-reader, like if a person didn't read the comic, like this stuff, the way that this show just begins to turn a new storyline or finally push you into a storyline that's been building in a way you didn't see coming, like is crazy. Like, yeah, nowhere in my mind when I was watching this episode and everything with Angstrom Levy that I would think Mark stuck in this wasteland would then set up this entire other storyline about the Viltrumite War and everything that happened, and then this other romantic storyline with Eve, like through this future Eve. And I was just like, wait, what? And like all that information that you get in that scene, and then Mark kicks back to his normal universe, is again already like, I'm like, there's so much mess here. Like, we've been talking about X-Men 97 a lot, and there's so much mess here that I love, that I'm already kind of in for. And I can already tell season 3 is going to be 10 times more exciting in terms of everything that's going to be happening. Yeah,
we're going to get more Alan the Alien. We know.
I was about to say that
back, so that's going to be great.
I was about to say, I'm so curious. I need just an episode of Nolan and Alan the Alien doing something
Prison Escape
together.
or something,
Yeah,
like a
Prison
Escape
Break.
would be so good.
Yeah. Yeah, and just the two of them trying to relate to each other and have a conversation and stuff. I will watch just that. Like, I'm in for season 3 just for that.
Mhm.
So, all in all, what do you think? Just final last topic, quick answer. What do you think the release strategy should be for season 3?
I think at that point you have to kind of go back to basics at the beginning. It's got to be sort of episodic in a way that an adventure of the week, a villain of the week, some sort of major world-ending crisis again. I did enjoy how a lot of the threats interwove this season and built on each other, and kind of the second half begun with a bunch of different things happening at once. But I think that the binging nature of the show was kind of lost over the week-to-week releases. So like it was really hard to get into these, cliffhangers when you have to wait, and then they're just resolved in the first 30 seconds of the next show, like Netflix style. And that's not what this was. So I really hope they kind of get to a little bit more self-contained stuff before, with the same deft way that they build upon it into like a bigger storyline. That being the thing that takes over the second half of the season. I really think that it's just going to be, you got to go back to basics, episodic, one and done adventures, go from there.
And do you think we should do it as weekly releases, just release the whole season, or do you think we should ever touch something like this 2-part split again?
The 2-part split, like you said, I think you alluded to that it kind of sacrificed a little bit of the momentum. I just think they got to have a plan of what the release strategy is going to be when they're writing the episodes, so that way they have an idea and they're not sitting there trying to scramble and do it as a weekly release or do something afterwards. Prime Video has shown that they can get away with both, like they have shown that they can get away with a full dump, 4-episode dump, or 8 episodes at once. But the things that the popular shows that they do, we've kind of seen that they do like 2-episode premiere, 3-episode premiere, and then week to week after that. If they just craft the episodes around that strategy, I don't think it'll be a problem. Don't really know what happened for season 2, but I mean, we got a second season of Invincible after years and years of waiting. So hopefully they have a better executed plan for season 3.
And hopefully we will be back here on Comic Book Nation to talk Invincible season 3 much sooner before much later, because yeah. All right. Thank you, Joe J.K. Schmidt, for coming on and talking Invincible with me. Your knowledge of the comics and just, your knowledge of the show is always invaluable. Check out everything on Comic Book Nation feeds. We are an entire nation of shows. If you want to kind of check out our main show and talk with us live, we do that every Friday on this channel and on the main comic book channel on Twitter and on your favorite podcast platforms. We also have Anime Initiative, which covers all things anime, Quick Save, which covers gaming, and The Pull List, which picks the best comics of the week and tells you all about them. Check that all out. Thank you. We are Comic Book Nation. See you Invincible fans out there. Peace.
Adios.